For a good many of us, flying a paraglider is the elixir that we mix with the rest of life to survive. I've come to view my time underneath the fabric canopy with the motor pushing me peacefully along dirt roads and through the forests of our country as the ointment that I smear on myself to heal from the wounds the world inflicts on us. If you saw my recent rant about how FAR 103 aviation isn't given due consideration by airport operators and other pilots in the broader aviation community, you've probably written me off as just a grumpy old man. And although I had promised myself I would never make a political statement mixing paramotors with politics, I was at the hardware store the other morning and I heard a horrible rumor that it doesn't matter who wins the next presidential election, Democrat, Republican, or Independent, they're not going to make yardsticks any longer. John here came to our little group of local flyers expressing very similar thoughts and concerns about how life had beaten him up and he just couldn't live anymore as a earthbound mortal. It has been really, really exciting to watch him progress from landlocked, mindless wanderer kicking stones to somebody that enjoys flying. Seriously, this guy's really doing well. So glad to see him getting in the air pretty successfully, almost every attempt. And he's got a good head on his shoulders. He makes a lot of good decisions. So we started to brief a little bit. This particular airport does not have a established procedure for keeping paramotors and FAR 103 traffic separate from the normal airplanes, right? So we're just going to do the best that we can. Philip, how many runways do you see here?
It looks like one.
Oh,
well.
And John, how many runways do you see there?
One.
Okay, but if you were to land this way, it would be one runway.
All right.
And if you were to land this way, it would be the other runway. So it's actually two runways, all right? All runways in the United States are designated by magnetic reference. Okay, so if a runway is east and west, the runways are 090 degrees toward the east, and then we call that runway 9, and it's 270 degrees toward the west, so we call that runway 270. And they're always, except in Alaska where runways actually bend, they're always reciprocal, 180 degrees out. So if it's 090 going this way, you add 180 degrees to that, it's 270 going the other way. And we drop the 0, and we call it runway 9er and runway 27. This runway out here is runway 18 and 36, so the corresponding magnetic orientation of the runway is north and south, 360 degrees, which is also 0, and 180 degrees, okay? So you'll hear pilots say, I'm taxiing out to use runway 9, or I'm taxiing out to use runway 18. So if you look at that sign out there, it says 18 and 36. All right, so if they're taxiing out to runway 18, they're taxiing off the ramp and they're going down there to wait at the end of the runway. They'll get to the end of the runway and they're going to utilize runway 18 when they take off. They're going to go southbound. All right, so there are a lot of rules to help keep traffic separated. The basic traffic pattern is a giant rectangle that overlays the runway. So when they take off on runway 18, the standard procedure is to take off to the south, and then depending on the traffic, if it's left traffic or right traffic, they'll make left turns or right turns, and you can find that in the Airman's Information Manual. You can find that in the thing called the segmented circle, and we'll actually walk out and look at it. If there's nothing indicated, the assumption is it's left-hand traffic for both of these pieces of pavement. So you take off here, you'd make a left turn on what's called crosswind, you'd make a left turn on what's called downwind, you You make a left turn descending on what's called base. You make a left turn to final to land on runway 9. Okay? So if you're going to use the other runway and it's left traffic, the traffic pattern is going to flip-flop and it's going to be over on this side of the airport because it's going to be a left turn on crosswind, a left turn on downwind, a left turn on the base leg, and then a left turn on the final approach to land on runway 27. Okay, so you'll hear pilots on your aviation radio say things like, Baron 6843 Bravo is 5 miles north of the airport. And we'll make left traffic for runway 27. So what he's going to do is he's going to maneuver to come in here to that rectangle that we already defined at a 45-degree angle at the mid-field point at pattern altitude. Usually 800, sometimes 1,000 feet. The standard is more now moving toward 1,000 feet above ground level. And that's where he'll join the pattern, and you'll hear a radio call. Baron 26 Echo, left downwind, entering the left downwind for runway 27. He'll fly along this way, and right before he makes the turn, he'll say, Baron 26 Echo making left base leg for runway 27. And when he turns final, he'll say, turning final for runway 27. All of his call signs will be preceded by the airport name. So the standard format is who you're announcing to, who you are, what you're planning on doing. So the typical call would be Pillion traffic, Baron 26 Echo, left downwind for runway 27. And he'll continue that all the way around. Once he's on the ground, he may decide to land and he'll call clear of the runway. He may not call clear of the runway. So there is not an absolute requirement that every airplane in the pattern makes those radio calls. Airplanes that were built without electrical systems may not be able to. They don't have to because they were built and certified by the FAA in the 40s. They didn't have to have electrical systems. There's a lot of pressure to have everybody do it and follow the standard. There is no legal requirement. This is suggested procedure for separating traffic. So a lot of times if there's two airplanes, they'll use the technique of what they call being a beam. So this guy will turn the base leg, this guy will turn the final, and this fella won't turn until he passes a beam or opposite direction directly off the beam of the airplane from the other guy. So you may hear more than one airplane in the pattern. And if they're doing touch and goes, they may be in the pattern the whole time. So what's the takeaway for us? Most of the takeoffs are going to be straight out, or they're going to be a 45-degree departure from whichever runway. Straight out, 45-degree departure. They may decide or elect to climb out in the pattern and take off this way. But they're going to do one of those three for the most part. You're not usually going to see guys making right turns as they take off. Not to say that they can't or that they won't. You're not going to typically see guys low on the downwind legs. That's where they're going to be high. Where you're going to see them low is in the approaching corridor, on both ends of the runway, and on the departure end of the runway. So if you want to be safe, we're operating from this area over here. Take off and avoid these key areas. Now, we haven't had any guidance or anybody tell us we can't cross the runway. A lot of airports where they have a sanctioned PPG or Part 103 operations area, they ask you do not cross the extended center line all the way out to 5 miles away from the airport in either direction at any altitude, especially if they've got traffic on that side of the airport, which is general aviation and airline traffic, and traffic on this side of the airport, which is paragliders. So they're asking you do not cross extended center lines of active runways. So what makes this a runway that's active versus not active?
If the aircraft is landed?
If it's in use, it's active. As far as for our concerns, if it's in use. Now, if there's a control tower, that's a different thing. They designate runway 27 as the active runway, or runway 9 as the active runway. Nothing says a pilot can't land downwind here. We had this discussion a little bit this morning, it doesn't really, there's nothing that says that they have to. And there might be, like I mentioned, some valid reasons for taking off downwind and landing into the wind. Maybe their base of operations is at this end of the airport. It's a long taxi down there. Maybe it's time critical. Like I said, half-life medicines that expire very quickly, or organs for transplant, they get dropped off here, and this guy says, well, look, I could taxi all the way down here and use this runway into the wind, or I've got the performance to just go downwind and take off this way. So those things happen. It happens with quite a bit of regularity at these smaller, non-towered, non-controlled airports. You'll see guys doing a lot of different things, but for the most part, their low-altitude maneuvering will be at the ends of the runways, and they're going to attempt to follow and fit in this traffic pattern scheme at every airport. So down and dirty, that's about it. So for us tonight, if we get you airborne, let's lay this out like our airport. We operate from this area over here. Depending on which way the wind is, if you get airborne, try not to cross the runway. Maneuver so as to climb up above the trees. That solar array is right down here on the other side of the road. So make your crossing over here to the south of the solar array. Stay under the traffic pattern, because here with left traffic, there may be airplanes coming in here making left traffic to land to the north on runway 36. Left downwind, left base, left on the final to land on runway 36, or taking off this way. But if we take off from our area, cross the road, stay south of the solar array, and stay below the traffic pattern until we get 2, 3, 4 miles. This is usually something that happens at about a half-a-mile distance from the runway. Now, some guys get sloppy. Faster airplanes need a wider pattern, and they're typically going to keep their altitude higher until they're established on final. Lighter airplanes, tail draggers, smaller airplanes, you'll typically see them in, maybe even a little bit lower, and they may have a tendency to get lower on base and final than the bigger airplanes, if you see bigger airplanes. But it's okay if we take off from here and pass under these airplanes, because they're established in the pattern. That's perfectly acceptable. Just know that in our situation, if this runway's in preferential use because of the wind out of the north, these guys coming in, maybe they're coming from Columbia, maybe they're coming up from Florida. They'll fly over the airport, they'll assess the runway, they'll see the windsock, they'll fly out here, they'll come back in, and they'll join that downwind leg at pattern altitude. They'll maneuver, and they probably, good pilot technique says, you shouldn't start to descend until you're abeam the touchdown zone. That's usually when guys start thinking about reducing power and configuring the airplane, putting the landing gear down to start a descent to make their final arrival. Okay?
So how much feet on that? 300? Coming out here?
For us,
Yeah.
yeah, 300's a good 300 feet AGL, so it's probably going to be more like 550 feet. Okay, because I think that this airport's like 250 or 260. I don't really know exactly what it is, you know, Philip.
It just says 740 right now.
Well, I'll tell you what we can do. You look
Sea
on
level.
look on the map right here, and I'll show you guys how to get this altitude information. So right here's the airport that we're at. So it's 452 feet above sea level. Okay. So that might be something to do with the low pressure that we're currently experiencing. Okay. So that first number is the altitude. So like Columbia's 425. My airport's 520.
Okay.
Okay.
I didn't know that. That's sweet.
So you'd like to be at if you're at 750 or 800 feet, crossing those trees until you get out about a mile or so. Take a look around. If there's no traffic, you can go up higher than that.
Now, where's those solar panels?
They're to the north, on the other side of the road, and it's a huge solar array. So it goes way out here. Okay. So when you get over here and you're over farmland, you know, our rules say we can go as low as we want. There are some things, there's obstacles, there's irrigation systems, there's some power line and power distribution, and some power collection coming out of those solar sites. So give yourself outs, but once you get back over this way and then we turn back up to the north, this is nothing but wide open farm fields up this way. So when you come back, look for the solar farm, stay high enough that you can glide to either side of it, cross over the western end of the solar farm over here, then maneuver, get down, come in here over the trees at 300 feet. Now, this is where it's going to get a little tricky. We're going to have to assess the winds. So I don't really want to see you land where Philip typically lands. I'd rather you landed between the runway and the taxiway out there.
Yeah.
Okay, so if the winds are out of the north, we're going to be landing to the north. Maneuver so as not to cross the runway. Look at the final. So right here, if you're flying, look at the final for airplanes. If there's an airplane, don't cross the runway. Turn around and go the other way. Come back. Okay? And let him land, let him taxi in, and then set up again. Come over here, make a couple small turns, you know. Set up and give yourself a nice long final. There's plenty of room here. Watch those VASI lights. See those orange boxes out there? They stick up, they'll get you. Watch the taxi lights. They'll get you. And if the winds are a little bit further to the east and they're blowing in this direction, you can land just to the outside of that windsock. That's perfectly fine. What I don't want to do is get you in tight by where those trees are creating a rotor spilling onto the landing zone that we typically use. Okay. If the winds are out of the south, this whole place is pretty safe because there's not nearly as much rotor activity because it's got a long straight run there. It blows right up the middle and it blows deep into our LZ, and by the time the rotor is effective, you're already, you know, well over the trees and you've cleared that by the windsock and on in.
How many hours a day is the radio tower manned?
Okay, there is no tower at this airport. Okay, this airport utilizes what's called a common traffic advisory frequency. That's on the chart here too, okay? That's where we get this. So this airport, the CTAF, it's 1.30, but where is it on there? Did they stop? Oh, this is a South Carolina chart, isn't it? Okay, on the federal chart, it's probably going to have that frequency on there. I almost can't believe that it doesn't. Well, Metro has their control tower there. Our airport, my airport, does not have anything on there. Saluda does not have anything on there. So you'd have to look it up in the facilities.
So it just means that everybody at this airport has got the radio on, might respond.
Yes. And there might not be a response. Okay, most of these transmissions about position are strictly informational. The only time that there's usually any dual two-way discussion is if you're trying to resolve conflict. So guys that are flying different types of airplanes at different speeds, or maybe they're both shooting for the same point. One will say, hey, we got you in sight, we're going to widen out, you can go ahead of us, or hey, I think we're ahead of you, we're going to continue for the runway if that's all right with you. So it's usually gentlemanly, sometimes it's not, but you know, for the most part, it's pretty congenial. And the odds of two airplanes being at the same point in space at the same time is pretty slim.
Especially this airport.
Yeah. And this airport's pretty typical of most general aviation, non-controlled airports. So, who wants the airplane? All right, see if you can get it to fly outside. I think we're done. We're heading out there.